Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Job order cost accounting focuses on the individual job, while process cost accounting focuses on the processes involved in mass producing products that are similar in nature. This video will talk about who uses process cost system. It explains the similarities and differences between job order cost and process cost system. It explains the flow of costs in a process cost system. It explains how to make the journal entries to assign manufacturing cost in a process cost system. In the second video on process costing, we will talk about how to compute equivalent units. And in the third video, we will talk about the 4 steps necessary to prepare a production cost report and how to prepare a production cost report. But in the beginning of this session, I would like to thank my son, Muhammad Abdullah Khan, who gifted me an iPad along with all the necessary accessories without which making these videos would not have been possible. I would like to thank Nabia Khan for helping me out in preparing these awesome slides. I would like to thank my wife Samina for her care, encouragement and constant support, who allowed me to use time for her in making this video. Let us start with who uses process cost system. Process cost system is applied when similar products are produced in mass quantities, like producing of the ice cream. Once the process begins, it continues until the ice cream emerges, and the processing is the same for the entire run, with precisely the same amount of materials, labor, and overhead. Each finished cup of ice cream of the same flavor is indistinguishable from another. Aramco uses process costing in the production of oil. Kellogg uses process costing for cereal production. Jotun Paints uses process costing for its paint products. In the case of Coca-Cola Company, the manufacturing begins with the blending of ingredients. Next, automated machines fill up the bottle caps and finally pack up the bottles to the finished goods warehouse. A job order cost system assigns cost to a specific job, like construction of a customized home or manufacturing of a specialized machine. While process costing system is applied where a product is made in mass production and in a continuous process. Let us see how production cost system can be used in service companies too. Service companies that perform routine competitive services will use process cost system. Auto care vendors that focus on routine aspect of care is a classic example that can use process costing for service companies. In the next slide, we will talk about similarities and differences between job order cost and process cost systems. Job order cost and process cost systems are similar in 3 ways. Both costing systems track 3 manufacturing elements, that is direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Both costing systems debit raw materials to raw material inventory, factory labor to factory labor, and manufacturing overhead cost to manufacturing overhead. Both systems accumulate all manufacturing cost by debits to raw material inventory, factory labor, and manufacturing overhead. Both systems then assign these costs to the same accounts: work in process, finished goods inventory, and cost of goods sold. The methods of assigning cost, however, differ significantly. Unlike job costing system that uses only one job in process account, a process cost system uses multiple work in process accounts. A job order cost system charges costs to individual jobs and summarizes them in a job cost sheet. A process cost system summarizes cost in a production cost report for each department. A job order cost system totals cost when the job is completed. A process cost system totals cost at the end of a period of time. In a job order cost system, the unit cost is equal to total cost per job divided by units produced. In a process cost system, the unit cost is equal to total manufacturing cost for the period divided by units produced during the period. We will talk about the process cost flow in the next slide. As can be seen, the company can add material, labor, and manufacturing overhead in both machining and assembly department. After the machining department finishes its work, it transfers the partially completed units to the assembly department. The assembly department transfers to the finished goods inventory after finishing the work at the end. In the next slide, on sales, the company moves the goods from the finished goods inventory to the cost of goods sold. In the next slide, we will discuss how to record general entries in assigning manufacturing cost. As already stated, the accumulation of the cost of material, labor, and manufacturing overhead is the same in a process cost system as in a job order cost system. All raw material issued for production are a material cost to the producing department. Let us see how companies assign these manufacturing cost elements in a process cost system. We will start with material cost. All raw materials issued for the production are a material cost to the producing department. At the beginning of the first process, a company may add material needed for production, but it may be adding other materials at various points. If the material is added for machining, work in process machining is debited and raw material inventory is credited. If the material is further added to assembly, work in process assembly is debited and raw material inventory is credited. For example, in the manufacture of ice cream, milk, sugar, cream may be added at the beginning of the first process and the wrappers and cartons are added at the end of the packaging process. Let us see how factory labor cost is recorded in process costing. In process costing, labor cost is assigned to each process. So work in process machining is debited for labor cost of machining and factory labor is credited. Work in process assembly is debited for labor cost of assembly and factory labor is credited. Next, let us see how manufacturing overhead costs are recorded in process costing. The manufacturing overhead cost should be allocated on an objective and equitable basis. That basis is the activity that drives or causes the cost. For example, time used may be a primary driver of overhead cost in continuous manufacturing operations and not direct labor. The general entry to allocate overhead to the two processes is work in process machining is debited for manufacturing overhead of machining and manufacturing overhead is credited. Work in process assembly is debited for manufacturing overhead of assembly and manufacturing overhead is credited. In the next slide, we will see how to record the cost of the goods transferred from one process to another. Suppose the manufacturing process involves only two processes, machining and assembly. So the general entry when goods are transferred from machining to assembly will be work in process assembly is debited and work in process machining is credited. The general entry to transfer work in process assembly to finished goods will be finished goods inventory is debited and work in process assembly is credited. And the entry to record the cost of goods sold at the time of sale will be cost of goods sold is debit while finished goods inventory is credited. In the next slide, we are going to solve an illustration. ABC company purchases raw material for 45,000 on account and incurs factory labor cost for 60,000. So they are purchasing the raw material, so raw material is debit by 45,000, and because this is on account, so accounts payable is credited by 45,000. Then they are incurring labor cost of 60,000, so factory labor is debit by 60,000 and wages payable is credited by 60,000. So these two general entries are the general entries for accumulating the cost. Next, the assembly department uses 24,000 of raw material and 35,000 of the factory labor. So work in process assembly department is debit by 24,000 and work in process finishing department is debit by 21,000. And the raw material inventory is credited by 45,000. You can see that this amount is the balancing figure. 45 minus 24 gives us 21. Then work in process for the factory labor it is 35,000. So work in process assembly department is debit by 35,000. You can remember that factory labor was 60,000. So the balancing figure for finishing department will be 25,000. Then manufacturing overhead is assigned to department on the basis of 200% of labor cost. Now labor cost is 60,000. So 200% of 60 is 120,000. And work in process now is going to be 200%, that is 70,000, and 25 will be 50,000. So That's how you see we have prepared the journal entries for accumulating cost. We have prepared journal entries for assignment of material and labor cost, and then we have finally made recorded journal entries for the assignment of overhead cost. For those who want to have a clear explanation, I have put the solution as well on this page. And let us go to another exercise. And here Harrelson company manufactures pizza sauce through two production departments, cooking and canning. In each process, materials and conversion costs are incurred evenly throughout the process. For the month of April, the work in process account shows the following debits. So we have to journalize the April transactions. So on April 30, we have work in process for for cooking 21 and canning is 9. So work in process cooking is debit for 21,000 and work in process canning is debit by 9,000 and raw material inventory is credit by 30,000. We have already stated this before that at the beginning of the process a company may add raw material, and in this exercise the company is adding material for cooking and canning. Then let us look into the labor on April 30. Again, the labor is 8,500 and 7,000 respectively. So work in process cooking is debit by 8,500 and work in process canning is debit by 7,000 and raw material labor is credit by 15,500. Next we go for the manufacturing overhead, that is for work in process for cooking is 31,500 and for work in process canning is 25,800. So the total will be 57,300 and this is manufacturing overhead. If you can remember that manufacturing overhead cost should be allocated on an objective and equitable basis. The basis of allocating manufacturing overhead is the activity that drives the cost. Finally, they are transferring in for 53,000 on April 30. So work in process canning is debit by 53,000 and raw material is credit by 53,000. For those who cannot catch up with what I have written on this screen, you can look into the answer over here as well. Let us look into one more example. Schrager company has two production departments, cutting and assembly. On July 1, inventories are raw material, work in process, work in process for cutting is 2,900, work in process for assembly is 10,600 and finished goods are 31,000. During July, we have the following transactions and we have to generalize these transactions. Now, first of all, there is a purchase of, so we have the first journal entry. So we are purchasing raw material. So raw material purchases, inventory will be debit by 62,500 and accounts payable is credited by 62,500 as they are purchasing on account. Then number 2, they have incurred 60,000 of factory labor. So factory labor is debit by 60,000 and wages payable is credited by 60,000. Then for number 3, incurred 70,000 of manufacturing overhead. So manufacturing overhead is debit by 70,000 and we are 40,000 was paid in cash, so cash is credited by 40,000 and accounts payable is credited by 30,000. We move on to number 4, requisitioned materials for cutting 15,700 and assembly is 8,900. So work in process cutting is 15,700 and work in process assembly is 8,900. So raw material inventory will be credited by 24,600. We go to number 5, used factory labor for cutting 33 and assembly 27. So again work in process cutting is debit by 33,000 and work in process assembly is debit by 27,000 and factory labor is credited by 60,000. We go to number 6, applied overhead at the rate of 18 per machine hour. So work in process cutting is debit by 18 times 1680 and this will be equal to 30,240 and then work in process assembly 18 into 1720 and that will be 30,960 and manufacturing overhead will be credited by 61,200. We go to number 7, transferred goods costing 67,000 from the cutting department to assembly department. So work in process assembly is debit by 67,600 and work in process cutting is credited by 67,600. We move on to number 8, transferred goods costing 134,900 from assembly to finished goods. So cost of goods sold is finished goods. So finished goods inventory is debit by 134,900 and work in process assembly is credited by 134,900. We move on to number 9. And for number 9, they say sold goods costing 150,000 for 200,000. So first of all, we will record the cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is debit by 150,000 and finished goods inventory is credited by 150,000. And then we move on to number one more over here, that is for the sale. So accounts receivable is debit for 200,000 and sales revenue is credited by 200,000 because we are selling on account. So this completes our discussion on process cost systems, job order cost and process cost systems, flow of cost in a process cost system, journal entries to assign manufacturing cost in a process cost system. In the next video, we will talk about equivalent units. Remember, effective questioning brings insight, which fuels curiosity, which cultivates wisdom. If you have any question regarding this session, then please don't hesitate to ask in the comment box or by email, and inshallah I will reply you back. Thank you so much and happy learning.